Hey, shalom. This is Chris with firstcenturychristianity.net, re-recording my sermon because we had some technical difficulties on Shabbat. And this one is called the 2026 Prophet Analysis. It's kind of a pun, but what I'm getting at is, when do we need to stop listening to people? What is the criteria for paying attention to people who have prophecy, who've received visions, who've received inspired word? And when do we stop listening to teachers that have gone too far? And also tying in the modern times where people are listening to pundits and news and information, and when to discern not to listen to certain people or people in general. Now, there's a difference between being a false prophet and misleading people and just being wrong. Being wrong is normal. Being wrong is something that we all have to deal with, that we all have from time to time. Here in our congregation, uh, it's wide open. There's questions and answer. The congregation gets to speak after sermons and sometimes even during them. And if I say something wrong, the congregation will just correct me in real time. In fact, it's the best way to get interaction. Not saying that I would ever do it on purpose, but saying something wrong in a message or in a study is a very good way of getting people involved, because they say, "Hey, wait a minute, that's not right." They want to get it settled. And so when you say something wrong, you do have to own it. And there's a thing that's happening today. Maybe it's been happening for 5 or 10 years, and I'm just realizing it. But there's one big thing that scholars are correcting that had been very accepted in one way for a very long time, even though the evidence pointed the other way the entire time. And that is called the parting of the ways. With respect to the parting of the ways, meaning, when did Christianity and Judaism separate? Because Christianity, called the way, or whatever the New Testament wants to refer to the people who believed in Yeshua right out of the gate, early Christianity, was a sect of Judaism. Paul even calls it this in when he's testifying to the king, or he's testifying to somebody in the later chapters of the book of Acts. So Christianity is a continuation of the faith of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the continuation of the faith of the God of YHVH, of Yahweh, and his son Yeshua. And it continues on. And for many, many years, people have concluded that very shortly after Christianity was born, maybe even less than 100 years, that it parted ways with the synagogue. A lot of people even want to say that it parted ways with the synagogue uh, as the letters were being written, as the Gospels were being written 30 or 40 years after the ascension of the Messiah. This is not true. We know this from reading the New Testament, that Paul continued to preach in the synagogues to Jews and Greeks his entire life. And it was recorded in his letters, and the New Testament books that were written after Paul's letters don't show any hint of this division whatsoever. And then we look at the historical record that's available to us, most notably the Council of Laodicea, and then other what they call early church fathers. I don't think they're church fathers, but that's what these people are called. And they are telling Christians to stop going to the synagogue, and to stop keeping Sabbath, and to stop fellowshipping with Jews, 300 years after the Messiah ascended. So what does this tell us? That the parting of the ways did not happen early, and that Christians and Jews continued to fellowship with each other, and probably in some cases couldn't even be discerned to be different for hundreds of years after the Messiah ascended. And this is another thing another reason to actually want to embrace this, is all the malarkey of the anti-Semitism we see coming from Christians today simply didn't exist for the first 300 years of Christianity. So I brought up this tangent to show you that the scholars had gone one way and are now embracing better information and better truth, and they're correcting. So that doesn't mean that they were false prophets or false teachers. It just means they learned and they corrected the error. This is an absolutely normal and expected thing to happen. Um, Now we're going to talk about the hierarchy. And the hierarchy in the history of prophets is from ancient Israel. They only read the Torah aloud every 7 years, if that's only if and when Israel was obedient. So people had to, that's why the Shema says that you teach them to your children constantly, and you speak of them when you rise up and you lay down. So you memorize it. So you hear the Torah at Sukkot every 7 years, and then you talk about it, memorize it, contemplate it the entire time. Having access to the Torah was not, very few people had it in the beginning. Very few people had it for a very long time, for hundreds of years, and maybe thousands of years. And so you had this hierarchy where prophets had to be evaluated probably by the priests and by people who knew the Torah to make sure that they were not teaching falsely or any such thing like that. The next stop in the hierarchy that I want to talk about is the first century. In the first century AD, that Second Temple period, the late Second Temple period, is when the accessibility to the scriptures was a lot wider than it had been in the ancient times, because the Bible was translated into Greek. The canon was established for the Tanakh. Tanakh is the Hebrew Bible, and people could hear Moses read in the synagogues every Sabbath. This is what the Acts 15 council referenced. So this is a good time, and it's where people had access to the scriptures. Maybe they could even go to their local synagogue and look something up, or have the rabbi look it up for them if they were looking for it. And famously, Paul says the people in one city were more noble than people in another because they searched the scriptures to see if they were so. So the accessibility of the scriptures means that more people could be tested if they had a vision, or if they had a teaching, or if they had something. And this is what we see manifested in Yeshua's interaction with the scribes, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees, is that they were all testing him to see where does he fit, to see if he's going to say something wrong. And they're testing all of his words against the scriptures, and the people who are doing it are people who had memorized it, in order to kind of trip him up, or to see, where he fell on the spectrum of doctrine. Then when the New Testament goes out, the gospel goes out, the new covenant goes out, and there's a flood of prophets, there's a flood of teachers, and they had to be tested against something. Now, in this case, Paul lists out hierarchies where teachers are above prophets. And teachers are above prophets because if somebody has a vision or they're teaching something, what they're saying has to be tested to be accurate against the Torah and the Tanakh, and also to see if they're going against false gods or going whatever, because this is something that is kind of eye-opening or jaw-dropping or whatever, is that people can get false visions and be true. False prophets can absolutely be right, and we're going to talk about this in the next few slides. And so somebody could be right and teaching falsely because they got the vision from demons or from nefarious black art sources. You can be absolutely true and move on with that. So you have to have a way of testing it. Paul establishes this by allowing himself to be tested against the scriptures, by testing things against the scriptures, and by having the congregations do that. Now we get into modern day, and in modern day is a much higher standard, because anybody who calls themselves a Christian and has not read the Bible cover to cover really has no excuse. There is no excuse to not know the Bible. We have the entire thing on our phones. We have them on our phones where you could have the phone read it to you in audio. You can listen to it in your car. You can read it. If you haven't read the Bible from cover to cover, what is your problem? Because that is the information that we need to have a relationship with God and his son. And everybody needs to have read it so that you don't get misled. That does not mean you have to be an expert. And I do have messages. If you go to firstcenturychristianity.net and go to the page called Start Here, there are 3 messages that teach you how to choose a Bible, how to read the Bible, and how to interpret the Bible. So that way, the whole, pompously, so the whole world has a place to go as a starting point. The whole world does not use the page, by the way. Very few people have accessed it, but the information is out there and you can get it and you need to know it, but you don't need to be a scholar. You just need to have read the whole thing to understand the patterns, the cycles, what the expectation is for a believer, and what God wants for mankind and where we're going to go. So that way, if somebody comes in preaching a different gospel or somebody comes in preaching contrary, you are at least armed to understand when to listen to them and when to not listen to them. The standard today is very, very high. And we have so many people on this planet and on this earth who have no intention of reading the Bible whatsoever and will just follow anybody who even just sounds nice, which is the reason for today's message. Stop doing that. You don't need to do that. You have the Bible. I'll give you a printed one if you come to the church in person. And they're very inexpensive online. You get them from the library. You get them on your phone. Read the Bible, see what it says, so that way you can test information that comes your way. So the next slide here is the actual establishment of when to listen to people. And this is Deuteronomy 13, 1 through 5. If a prophet or dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder comes true concerning which he spoke to you, saying, let us go after other gods whom you have not known, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For Yahweh your Elohim is testing you to find out if you love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your soul. You shall follow Yahweh your Elohim and fear him, but you shall keep his commandments. And listen to his voice, serve him, and cling to him. But that prophet or dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has counseled rebellion against Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you from the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery, to seduce you from the way in which Yahweh your Elohim commanded you to walk, so you should purge the evil among you. Well, today we do not live in ancient Israel, so we will not be putting anybody to death for being false prophets. But understand what is written here is that the prophet or the dreamer of dreams can give you a sign or a wonder that is true. But if they don't follow the Torah and they don't follow Yahweh, you don't listen to them. Plain as day. So this is a hard pill to swallow and hard medicine. All these people who have visions and have comprehension or something, some word that they think has been given to them, who teach that the Torah has been nailed to the cross and there is no law, we can't listen to them, whether what they say is true or not. And that's very important, because we can't allow ourselves to accidentally be misled to follow false gods. People have ulterior motives. And today people are tickling ears just to get clicks on the internet. They're saying just bombastic things just to get a following. This happens throughout history. So when you get a word and somebody gives you a word, what is the purpose of it? Is it supposed to bring you closer to the God of Abraham, or is it doing something else? And you have to discern this in order to understand if what they're telling you should be taken seriously or not, even if they have the ability to tell you what's going to happen in the future. Because understand that the priests of Egypt who worshiped those false gods were able to do magic, and they were able to do things. And the Pharaoh went to get Joseph because people couldn't interpret one dream, which means people had interpreted his other dreams. This is very, very disturbing, because most of Christianity teaches that the false gods aren't real and don't have any power, except Yahweh commands us not to follow the false gods, and he wouldn't tell us to do something if it were impossible. The Torah would read differently. So these false gods, which are sometimes are fake and just idols of wood and stone, but sometimes there's something there. There's black arts, there's dark magic, and we can't listen to them just because they give you the right answer or do they work miracles. They have to be tested to be following the Torah. The next slide here, it broadens it out. Isaiah 8, 19 through 20, when they say to you, consult the mediums and the spiritists who whisper and mutter, should not a people consult their Elohim? Should they consult the dead on behalf of the living? To the law and to the testimony. If they do not speak according to this word, it's because they have no dawn. If they have no dawn, they have no light in them, that they're dwelling in darkness. Now, this is very important information because mediums and spiritists apparently can talk to something. They probably are talking to the dead and raising them up or bringing them back to consciousness or some such thing. But Isaiah expands the specification to the law and the testimony, meaning the law and the prophets. The standard grows as time goes on so that a new prophet cannot contradict an old prophet. The story has to stay pretty much the same from Genesis to Revelation, which is why this ministry exists, because the story and the expectation pretty much stays the same from Genesis to Revelation. And all these folks who think that there was this dramatic change after the death of Yeshua, Jesus, that would make it very difficult for us to follow God because he could change it back or change it again someday. We have to have a certain degree of stability in the relationship in order for us to know who and what to follow. Otherwise, we're just wandering around and you could have chaos. You could have people saying they have visions that say that you can't do anything anymore or that these sins are okay, and people would be following them, and they would ultimately be okay if a change could happen that big. Now, there are some times when Yahweh does change his mind and change stuff or do stuff that might be a little different than what we're accustomed to. And he does tell us through his prophets when that happens. One case in point is Jeremiah lived at the tail end of Judea before they got carried off into captivity. And God told Jeremiah to tell the people, hey, look, this is coming. This invasion, this onslaught is coming. But if you repent, we'll stop the invasion. Now, that would mean that, that the prior prophet, Isaiah, that was telling them, hey, you guys are going to get smote, you guys are going to get smote, could have been staved off if the people had repented of the idolatry and purged it from their midst, according to the prophet Jeremiah. Now, they weren't ever going to do that. They certainly didn't do that. But in that case, Yahweh was saying that, hey, this onslaught that's prophesied, that's coming, this king is coming in, he's going to take you guys out. It doesn't have to be this way if you put away the false gods and return to me, because that was one of the main purposes, or the purpose of that exile, was to teach the people a lesson for blending false worship with the true. And that is something that's one of those patterns, one of those things that is still true today. We aren't to blend. We are to worship Yahweh the way Yahweh wants to be worshiped, the way his son worshiped him while he was on the earth, to show us the pattern. And then Paul says, follow him as he follows Christ, and follow Christ as Christ follows Yahweh. So that way you can have this peace and this continuity of the faith. Now here is the poster child of what happens if you do not follow these rules. 1 Corinthians 10, 13 to 14. So Saul died for his trespass because which he committed against Yahweh, because of the word of Yahweh, which he did not keep, and also because he asked counsel of a medium, making inquiry of it, and did not inquire of Yahweh. Therefore he killed him and turned the kingdom over to David, the son of Jesse. Saul is the poster child for this because he was the first king, and he got anointed, and he got visions, and he got connected to Yahweh like he had never been connected before, and he went too far. And he decided that he was going to do things that he was not supposed to do, and he lost that connection. He lost his anointing. So for those people who say works don't matter, here you go. They absolutely do matter. For those people who say you can't lose your salvation, you absolutely can lose your salvation. And for those people who say it's okay to talk to the dark arts and stuff today, you cannot. Saul had actually had all the witches and the stuff rounded up, and he was telling everybody to stop doing it like he should have. And then when he lost that connection, he was addicted to it. And he lost that connection, and he forsook Yahweh, and he went to counsel of a medium. And what happened was he got the right answer. He went to the dark arts. She conjured up, I believe, Samuel. Samuel says, "Why have you disturbed my sleep?" So Samuel was sleeping, as death equals sleep. And then Saul gets the answer that he wasn't actually looking for, but he got the true answer. And he ended up dying according to the word of that false prophet. This is disturbing, but it's the lesson we need to learn. Yahweh doesn't command us to not talk to mediums and spiritists and false gods frivolously. And he doesn't do it to try to say that they don't exist or whatever. He's just saying, you don't mess with that realm. There's something there, and it's behind a curtain, and he's protecting us from it, and we are to stay away from it and follow his commandments because, A, he said so, right? That's reason enough. We're not disobedient children that need to have stuff proved to us. He says don't do it, you don't do it. But it looks like it's actually in our best interest to leave that alone. We're not equipped. Those are spirit beings in a spirit realm that are outside of our contact for a reason. And we need to not open the door to talk to them. And we need to dismiss people who do. So if the tarot card reader tells your buddy his fortune and it comes true, okay, you don't go to the tarot card reader because that's a sin. If somebody consults with psychics or consults with the dark magic and they start getting knowledge of things that are going to happen and it comes true, they're not keeping the Torah. You can't listen to them. You can't follow them. You can't do it, even if it works. That's the standard. It has to work and it has to be aligned with the Bible. Okay. Now, here's a prophecy from Daniel 9:24 through 27 is a prophecy of the Messiah. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks. In 62 weeks, it will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Then after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come the one who makes desolate, and even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So this prophecy is how the people of the first century knew to expect the Messiah. The way these weeks line up, they're not really weeks. They're other measurements of time disguised as weeks. Let's say from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah, the Prince. Well, that was exactly when Yeshua, the Messiah, died. Was exactly this time period. And Yeshua is the only prophet, the only one claiming to be Messiah in first century Judea that I know of that was saying the temple was coming down. That's what this says. In broad strokes, this is saying that the Messiah is going to come, and after the temple is rebuilt, the Messiah is going to come, and after that, everything's coming down. Desolations are determined. Everybody else was saying that the Messiah was going to liberate Judea and restore the kingdom after pushing the Romans out. That is not what this says. But people wanted to hear what they wanted to hear. They wanted the Messiah to come to liberate them. They didn't want the Messiah to come and then have their country taken away. Who wants this? But because of their human condition and their desires, they were hearing things that they wanted to hear. That's a problem. Here in Luke 19:41-44, when he approached Jerusalem, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if you had known in this day, even you, the things which make for peace, but now they have been hidden from your eyes, for the days will come upon you when your enemies will throw up a barricade against you and surround you and hem you in on every side, and they will level you to the ground and your children within you, and they will not leave you in one stone above another, upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation. Well, it shows that that the people were actually blinded. But these people who were supposedly knowing the scriptures, knowing when the Messiah was going to come, and they kept asking him if he was going to restore, if he's going to restore, if he's going to restore. In Matthew 24, it starts with the question, hey, Yeshua, when are you going to restore the kingdom, buddy? And he turns back and says, not only no, it's going to get really bad. It's going to be awful. You're going to have to flee to the hills. And when it happened in AD 70, those who believed in Yeshua fled to the hills because they knew better, because they knew this information. The Sadducees were the ones who principally rejected him and rejected the concept of a Messiah, and they don't exist anymore. The Essenes don't exist anymore, and the Pharisees barely survived, only to turn into rabbinic Judaism and people who believed like us. I refer you to the aforementioned parting of the ways. Pharisees were open to a Messiah. They were open to the resurrection of the dead. They were open to these things. And so those are the Jews that accepted him and were baptized and became Messianic believers in the first, second, third, fourth centuries. Those that continued on. And it's a blessing today because many Jews are returning to that truth and accepting Yeshua as the Messiah and completing their faith. But the point here is that they should have known that it was time, if it was time for the Messiah, that it was also time for everything to come down. But they didn't, because they were looking through at the world through rose-colored glasses. They wanted to hear what they wanted to hear. And this is the same as today. One of the messages, the points of this message, is how many millions and millions of people continue to listen to charlatans and false prophets and people who are literally lying, and they do it religiously. Because these people, these podcasters, these people in the media will tell you things that you want to hear so that you keep tuned in and you keep clicking their links. Stop doing that, if for no other reason than just to have some self-respect. After somebody lies to you or somebody claims to have some kind of insight or authority, and they go off and get the power to make a change, and they can't, they come crawling back, you have to disregard them. There's nothing for you there. The same thing for people who believe in partial birth abortion, for example. If somebody in their brain has concluded that it's okay to murder a fully developed child that's about to be born or in the process of being born, I'm not interested in just about anything else that person has to say. Definitely not of anything of any type of importance. It doesn't mean that you have to disfellowship them or whatever, because you have to have work colleagues and you have to have, interaction with the world. But people who have clearly depraved minds, or are charlatans, or are clearly lying, or are wrong and refuse to accept correction, have to be ignored. Otherwise, you will just be misled and you'll be believing whatever you want to whatever you want to hear. And this is the human condition and has been the entire time. People in ancient Israel wanted somebody to come along and tell them that it was okay to follow the false gods and to follow Yahweh at the same time. That's what happened when Jeremiah got taken off into Egypt. And the people were saying, we're going to do what we want to do. We're not listening to you. We're not listening to that Yahweh. We had our kids when we were pouring out drink offerings to the Queen of Heaven. And right when they were worshiping the false god, they're saying they had their husbands and everything was okay, not realizing that that their husbands died because they were pouring out drink offerings to the Queen of Heaven. So when people are dealing with scripture, we have to really pay attention. Now, this is a difficulty for us because we're such a minority. Those of us who keep the Torah and believe in Yeshua, even though Revelation says we're supposed to, and all the believers in the New Testament did, we're in the minority. And we have to rely on scholars and on research material to learn. And so when people are in their academic mode and they're putting forth information that they believe is to be true, but you don't believe as they do, or you don't even know what they believe as far as religion goes, you have to take in the data and test the data against the scriptures and against the truth. That's just fine. When people are wrong and they're genuinely wrong, then that's okay because we all are to some degree. But when people are wrong and the right information is available and they're refusing to see it, then you have to kind of move on. And the most educated people in this world today that we live in make their decisions based on emotion and what they want to hear. And that is a humongous problem. But it is the answer to why so many people could be deceived in the end of days, because mob rule is going to persist. Understand that that's how the Messiah was put to death. Even though it was prophesied, he was put to death because the priests and Satan whipped the people into an emotional frenzy to where they cried out, crucify him. And they even cried out, we have no king but Caesar, which was a rejection of Yahweh himself. They made that brief emotional plea to have an innocent man murdered, whereas today we have lived for the last 10, 15 years in the West in a constant state of mob rule where people are whipped up to believe stuff that is not true, and they believe it and they never test it and they never change their mind. Those are the rose-colored glasses that we need to make sure we don't put on. We took them off when we learned the truth of Scripture, and when we learned to reject Sunday and go back to Sabbath, reject Christmas and Easter, and go back to, the Torah's holy days, Leviticus 23. We have to continue in that realm of analyzing data and having clear eyes. And when somebody that we agree with lies, you have to stop listening to that person. 2 Timothy 4:1-4, I solemnly charge you in the presence of God and of Messiah Yeshua, who is to judge the living and the dead, and by his appearing in his kingdom, preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with great patience and instruction, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance to their own desires, and will turn away their ears from the truth and will turn aside to myths. As far as the Bible goes, we have a conundrum. Relatively speaking, hardly anybody believes like us. But we still need information. And sometimes we have to look at the wrong information so that when people come out of those systems, we can empathize with them and understand where they're coming from and get them on the right path. It's dangerous work. But if you understand the Bible and you are free to, to make your own discernment, then you need to do that. Now, this doesn't mean that every believer has to be a teacher. That's not the way the New Testament works. The New Testament congregations were to have beliefs or not beliefs, but to have gifts that were spread out among the brethren. That is the case today and what we're trying to do in our assembly as well. There's a tendency and a penchant for all the denominations to look at the guy who has the microphone and say, well, he's the preacher, he's the prophet, he's the administrator, he's the leader, and we're all just going to line up behind him and follow that guy. Well, that turns that guy into a god. We're not. We can be wrong. I'm wrong, and the congregation sets me straight, usually very quickly. And the jobs and the duties need to be spread out so people are not overwhelmed, and so that other people have an opportunity to enter ministry and to contribute to the congregation. We have to have a body of believers that fulfill the role of the body of believers for a New Testament congregation. Their scholars are coming out now who don't believe like us, who are finally talking about the ugly, messy truth of first century Christianity and rabbinic Judaism's birth, which came after Christianity, incidentally, and letting us know the details so that we can actually have a mature outlook and a mature understanding of what really happened back then. Now, these scholars probably don't believe like us. They may not believe at all. But as long as they're having fidelity to the academic pursuits and dealing with the information that they find, in an upright and ethical manner, then there's no reason not to consume the information and have it help us inform us on the scriptures themselves. But the people who are just absolutely wrong and refuse correction, we do have to stop listening to them. The biggest example of that is Pat Robertson, Reverend Pat. Before he passed away, he was in this interview with a lady on TBN, and a caller sends in a question saying, we have these friends who don't celebrate Christmas because they say it's a pagan holiday, and Jesus wasn't born on the 25th of December. And Reverend Pat turns around and says, they're right. That Christmas is a pagan holiday, and every bit of it is pagan. And he goes on and on and on. I'm pretty sure I have this video at firstcenturychristianity.net for people to see. He goes on for about 4 or 5 minutes and tells the entire world what we've been telling the world, those of us who believe like us, those who believe, who've casted off the pagan holidays. He tells everybody that we're right and that it is all pagan. And he wasn't born on December 25th. He even laughs when he mentions that. Now, this fellow knew the truth perhaps the entire time that he was a minister, and he says this late in life. He's going to have to answer for that. But now you have to wonder, if somebody can hide something that important from his congregation and never tell the people the truth, then what else was he hiding? What else did he know that he didn't say? This is the problem. And it's a difficulty for preachers, people like me, because we're walking on a tightrope. If we say something, slightly wrong or whatever, we get corrected. But if we tell whoppers, we damage the gospel, right? James 3 talks about be not many teachers, and it goes on to the damage a tongue can do. Well, guess what a keyboard can do? Guess what a camera and a recording device can do? We have to be very dedicated to accuracy. And of course, you're going to learn as time goes on, and you're going to be wrong, and you're going to have to make corrections. But do it. Make the corrections. Do not be stubborn. Do not double down. Preachers can be wrong and not dismissed. Not everybody knows everything. Nobody knows everything, really. And we all continue to learn. But those who continually preach false after they learn have to be rejected. And that happens also in the square of public information. If your guy has predicted the end of days 3, 4, 5 times, one time wrong, then he's got to go. To understand that if somebody is claiming to know the day that Yeshua is returning, they're claiming to know more than the very Son of God. That's some serious hubris right there. We're not supposed to set those dates, and we're not supposed to make predictions. We're supposed to follow God the way his Son showed us. And if we do that, it doesn't really matter when he comes back. In fact, when Yeshua comes back, will be a good day for us. That will be a joyous occasion when we do see the returning Messiah coming on clouds of angels to judge this world, because he's coming to find us doing the will of his Father, doing his will, doing what we're supposed to do. Thank you for watching, and may Yahweh bless you and keep you in the name of his son, Yeshua. Please do like and subscribe. Visit firstcenturychristianity.net to see more teachings like this. And thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Have a blessed week, and thank you so much. Bye-bye.